Lesson number 14 on the study of John. But what I want to do is we're only going to go 1 through 9. We start chapter 7. Chapter 7 and 8 of John, we get into more persecution. And so Jesus kind of moves out of the miracle making into responding to persecution. We still get some, but John is really focused, the gospel writer is really focused. The thing that I found kind of confusing is I remember the Gospel of John is written very different than the Synoptic Gospels. It's written in basically for all believers. It's written for the world. And the year of Jesus' ministry, we call a year of obscurity, really was between Jerusalem back and forth, and persecution started to build up. And he went up, and most of his ministry was in Capernaum, which is in Galilee region. It's north edge of Israel. Samaria is in between it. So you have Jerusalem, Samaria is in between it. And of course, they had nothing to do with the Samaritans. And so they go around the coastline to Caesarea, which was a Roman establishment, and it's there today here to visit Israel, if they ever let us back in. And then you move all the way up into the small towns, and Capernaum is right on the northern edge of Lake Galilee. Anyway, as we moved in chapter 6, we saw the feeding of the 5,000. We saw walking on the water, right? All those things. And then he said, basically, the harvest is great. And he says, so he's running into more persecution. So at the end of chapter 6, we have, and after these things, usually that's a meaning that we've got a blank time. We've got a period of time. We don't know how far it is. Then he walked back to Galilee. That's because the persecution was building up in Jerusalem, and he went back to Galilee. So we're kind of, it appears we're finishing this year of what we call a year of obscurity, and we're moving into more of this ministry, which most of that was in Capernaum in Galilee, not in Jerusalem. But every time he went down there, there was so much persecution. So with that, give you an idea of where we are. We're going to start chapter 7. And if you go to Mark, now chapter 7, we've already had the feeding of the 5,000, right? John makes no reference to the 12 apostles being fed. You remember we started off and it was Andrew and Andrew and John that followed him, and then Andrew went and got Peter and said we found the Messiah, and then he added Nathaniel, and he added a few people. We never got the picture of all of them. And the other 3 Gospels, particularly, I think Mark and Matthew, actually name them in groups of pairs, of twos. And we have 2 sets of brothers first, and I'm not going to go through that just for the time's sake. But what's interesting is we know we've been past the feeding of the 5,000, but John makes no mention about the 12 apostles that were being selected. So when you go back to Mark, well, it's actually Mark chapter 3. That we find the 12 apostles being appointed. And then we have basically the feeding of 5,000, and then we had the death of John the Baptist. That's in Mark 6. So you go Mark 3 to Mark 6, and we got the feeding of the 5,000, and then we got John the Baptist that's beheaded. So you get a little bit different flair of that, and then you get into the feeding of the 5,000, and the appointment of the apostles are in Luke 9, right? And then they're in Matthew 14 is the appointment of the apostles and the feeding of 5,000. Actually, Matthew 10 appoints the apostle, and it takes to Matthew 14 for the feeding of 5,000. In between there, John is in jail. John the Baptist is in jail, and he is beheaded sometime in that time frame. So you have the apostles being pulled together. You have the feeding of 5,000. You have John the Baptist being arrested. You had John's disciples, remember, came and was questioning, should we be fasting and things like that. I'm not sure that was Matthew or John, but they come in that period challenging Jesus because John is in jail. He hasn't been killed yet, but he's in jail. That's the perspective. I'm trying to put the backdrop. You know, he was in and out of Jerusalem. Now he's going back to Galilee. It appears he's going to go into his main ministry that now ties back with some of these the synoptic gospels. So as you read through this, you have to be really careful about the timelines, because you really see the fact that the feeding of 5,000 almost look like a different group. Because it's so different, the scenario that leads to it. Because the other three synoptic gospels that talk about the 5,000, it talks about people coming in after they sent the apostles out 2 by 2, and all the towns saw the miracles that the apostles did. Then all the people were following the apostles back, and they found Jesus, and that's when he said the 5,000, which is not the same we got in John chapter 6. It sounded like everybody was coming to the feast, right?
Right.
So which one is true is hard to put your head around. So I'm just giving you a backdrop there. If you've got to be really careful when you're doing it. It is the one feeding of 5,000, but they're putting completely different spins on it. And that's just the way they do it. And why? Because they're written to different audiences. Remember, they're targeting different audiences, and they're going to write it for that audience. So with that, we really move into coming out of chapter 7. We come into, I mean, chapter 6. We come into chapter 7. We're going to start at verse 1. Like I said, we'll only go through 9, but we said we would keep this kind of quick tonight. So with that, I'll turn it over to Annette, and she'll start.
Okay, let's read John chapter 7, verses 1 through 5. After these things, remember, whenever the scripture starts that, you have to look back, like, what things? And that's just connecting what had happened at the end of chapter 6. So after these things, Jesus walked in Galilee, for he did not want to walk in Judea, because the Jews sought to kill him. Now the Jews' feast of tabernacles was at hand. His brothers therefore said to him, "Depart from here and go to Judea, that your disciples also may see the works that you are doing. For no one does anything in secret while he himself seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world," for even his brothers did not believe him. So they're mocking him here, okay? So my first question is, did Jesus remain in Galilee because he was hiding from the Jews? No, why do you think no?
He just wasn't his time to go. It just wasn't his time.
Okay,
We've been talking about his time hasn't arrived. Every time he's gonna go to Jerusalem, there's always been like a setback, but it's just not his time, not his time, so.
okay, well, since we're in person, I'll go ahead and do it myself.
Yeah.
And instead of telling Kathy, because that's exactly the right answer. It's not that he has a lack of courage. Obviously, Jesus evaded many tough situations, or he can just slip in and out, and it's not a lack of courage. It is knowing his father's perfect timing and knowing that the time is not correct. And so it's just not time for him to be delivered to the Gentiles. So this passage actually happens about 7 months after what happened in chapter 6. So we've had this nice big gap in there. And again, we tend to read the scriptures and think, oh, well, this has all happened right together. No, we're about 7 months past where we left from last week. And he continued to teach, perform miracles, but he avoided the large public places. Okay, he just kind of heavily populated areas. As Dave said, he was going around the smaller towns in Galilee.
Okay, and the thing I want to kind of point out is John is the one that really points to Jesus's brothers and his families. You'll hear a lot of people say, well, Jesus really, Mary was a virgin after. No, he has brothers and sisters. And so that really comes through this. So that's a question coming up as well. So the question that comes here is, it sounds like he's going to the Feast of the Tabernacles. So there are 3 feasts that are mandated in Mosaic law that every able-bodied Jew has to make. It's mandatory. And people come from Galilee, which is the northern section, and that's over 100 miles. That's not an easy walk by foot. But there's people even outside of that area that may take 2 to 3 weeks to get to a Passover. And it's 3 times a year, then they have to stay for a week. So we're almost talking about 3 months out of a year. A person is either traveling to a feast or staying there and then traveling back. So it's really a lot of time involved. Some of them, depending on how close they are to Jerusalem. So what are the 3 feasts?
Passover.
Passover's one.
Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur is the anointment of the final. That's actually, I'm not sure it's a feast. It's a celebrated period.
Right.
Is for where the priest went and anointed Israel for all sins. It's the only time the priest went in the Holy of Holies. Is that.
It's a holy day for sure, it's a
It-
high.
It's a holy day.
But it's not one of those.
It's not one of those.
ESV changes it to Feast of Booths,
Like,
so.
And it's known as both, and do you tell them why?
Yeah.
Yeah, he'll get into explaining what that is.
it's fine. So there's three major feasts. The first one is Passover. That's March, April, our calendar. Right? And Passover, we know was in Egypt, the Passover lamb. They would say, put a lamb in the blood dripping down of the boat, stop the angel of death from visiting that house. Okay, and that was to celebrate that God saved them with the sacrifice of the lamb, which is a prototype of Jesus on the cross. So, I mean, that's what that resembles. So that's Passover, and they're required to come to Passover. And if you remember, as we move through John, we'll get into the last Passover. So we think this is the last set of feasts that Jesus is going to. But he's going to, then right after Passover, it's about 49, 50 days. It's called Passover. And it's a feast
Pentecost?
of Pentecost. No, it's the Pentecost. And it's called the Feast of the Tabernacles. That's the next one. No, it's called
The
the
Feast
Feast,
of Week, 49 weeks.
the what?
49 weeks.
49 weeks after Passover. So that is when we get into Jesus' ascension, it happened in Pentecost. So that he was crucified at the end of the Passover week, and he basically was taken back up 40 days. He re-entered heaven in 40 days, and then at the 50th day, at the feast of the 49 weeks, which is Passover, Pentecost, that's when the anointing of the Holy Spirit came into the group, and then you get that in Acts. We had 3,000 that was saved, but Jesus' ascension happened about 10 days before that. And we have that, that's all coming in later on. So that's kind of the Pentecost. Pentecost happens after Passover, and I'm not getting into all the requirements of Pentecost. You have unleavened bread, and you have things, a lot of different things that go on. But then you have the Feast of Booths, or really what's called the Tabernacle, Feast of the Tabernacle. And that is when they're celebrating coming out of the wilderness. Okay, that's where God provided manna, and they had temporary housing in the 40 years of the wilderness. And so many Jews would set up tents or build little temporary homes or on top of roofs, lean-tos, and they would stay outside to come to kind of represent that type of feast.
This
Well,
feast is a lot of fun.
Right,
It was a party.
it was joy, it's party, it's drunkenness, it's
Well,
everything. It's a party time, and it's a time of great joy. And it's in September, October, whereas you have Passover that's in March and April, and then Pentecost is 40 days, 50 days after Passover. So that's kind of the resemblance here. Here we have now Jesus is going to the Feast of Tabernacles. That's September, October. So then his next thing he goes to is going to be Passover. So I think after this feast, we're October, September, October, by the time we get to March and April, that's his last Passover. So we're in a very last section of his ministry, and he's spending a lot of his time in Passover week. Most of John's gospel, about 50% of it is all dedicated to the week of Passover. So that's where it's being focused on. So the last question with this question, because it's just large crowds coming down, why are these feasts mandated in Moses' law, in the Torah, that they have to make them?
Because history is so important to this people. Remembrance of what they've been through as a people led by God, trying to keep it going through generations and generations? Or was it actually written in the first 5 books of the Bible?
It's in actually in Deuteronomy, so it's in
Okay,
the
so
first Bible.
they've been mandated by God to.
That
hold
they
these.
mandated by God to do it. The reason is not just for Jews. What happens, and you remember the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, when we did that with Jake, I don't know how many sessions y'all may have been on. The people came back and remember they didn't know anything about the feast because they've been in 70 years of captivity.
Got it.
We think some of them still did it, but it wasn't like this. So they reinstituted, remember the feast at the end of, I think it was Nehemiah, but one of those. So that's when they came back. So the point here is God did this for a specific purpose that applies to us today. Why do we have 4th of July? Not for fireworks. It's to remember our independence and how many people died to give us that independence. The remembrance of Veterans Day. Why do we have that? It's not to get a holiday and not go to work, which is the reason we think that. But the reason for that, quite honestly, is for us to remember our veterans and how many died and sacrificed to give us the freedoms that we have today. All right, what's the meaning of Christmas? It's not presents and lights. It's the meaning of Christ in his first coming, his first advent. And so these holidays or feasts or celebrations are not meant, though we enjoy fellowship and we enjoy good meals and we enjoy all that stuff. They're meant to bring us in remembrance, because we as human beings, as we skip to generation, what happens is we forget altogether what the previous generation did, and we forget about it. And if these weren't mandated, these feasts would have been gone in history somewhere up under locks and would never be there. Yom Kippur, they would celebrate that. It'd be gone forever, right? So the feasts are being told for a specific reason, so that we have, and as you said, Kathy, remembrance. Why did you're trying to cut it down?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, you will lock it up. These feasts are there for remembrance, just like Jesus said, do this in remembrance of me. When you look at the Lord's Supper and you take that, it's not to eat bread or to drink grape juice. All right, and it's not anything other than to remember what Jesus did on the cross for you. So you see how these holidays, these feasts, we kind of take, for example, we enjoy them, but it's God's way of saying, I'm giving you this so you go back and remember. And so generations from generation, we don't forget these things in the history that what God has done. So they have a real big meaning that we sometimes miss. And I thought that was pretty interesting as you go through here, you look at why were these mandated? And that's, in my opinion, that's the reason why. So I don't know if there's any more discussion, or move to the next question. Good. Okay.
So the next question is, there are questions, you'll find people that debate or argue that Jesus had brothers or he didn't have brothers. Is there any question, and why does he have brothers or does he not have brothers?
Yeah, brothers.
He does. So there is no question that Jesus had half brothers. There's none whatsoever, because the Bible, and he also had sisters, because the Bible clearly states that he had siblings. It clearly does. You will find certain religions that want to say that Mary remained a virgin the entirety of her life. And they are very adamant that she remained a virgin forever. And I think they're called Papist or the Papish Church for sure. So they think that she's perpetually a virgin. But we know Jesus talked about his brothers. The Bible talks about his brothers. It's stated he has brothers. I don't know why everybody is trying to make that into, like, I would call you my brother and sister in Christ. I don't know why they keep trying to take the Bible and make that when he talks about his brothers that, but Jesus absolutely had brothers. Half brothers and half sisters.
Right.
Okay, next question. Says, what can we conclude about Jesus's brothers from their comments that they do?
They were not, they didn't believe him.
That's right.
They didn't have, they were questioning him,
Yeah,
even seeing stuff.
right. So it's not that they did not believe in his miracles. They saw the miracles like everybody else. So, but they didn't believe in him. Why? And what are they not believing in Jesus? I guess is a better question. They know he did the miracles, but
They were expecting him to do like. They wanted him to go out, like they were saying, go out and do it in front of everybody. Let everybody see,
yeah.
And that's not what he was out to do.
The miracles were there for a specific reason, and as Annette said when she read this, is that they may have been mocking him. There's a lot of commentators said that they were mocking him, saying, look, if you claim to be who you are, and you do all this stuff, go show yourself to the world and prove it. And so I do think they knew his miracles, they believed he had the power to do that, but I really don't think they had any belief that he was the promised Messiah. Right? He was their older brother, though half brother. And what happens to most older siblings is they get most of the benefit. The younger siblings get, the hand-me-downs, and so there may be a little bit of I guess, challenge between Jesus being the older brother and the half brothers, right? So they may not have had a lot of appreciation for Jesus growing up, because he probably did get a lot of favor from Mary, particularly, right? She have to, she knows she was seeking for God. So it probably was a challenge. So I do think it could be a part of mockery here because of that. But they were looking for the Messiah. They were looking for his second coming Messiah. They were looking for a King of Kings. And so just like the rest of the Jews were. So they did not believe that he was the Messiah. They really didn't. And that's what it's very clear his own family did. And so that had to be, it's one thing to be rejected by people you don't know. It's something else to be rejected by people that you're close to. And he's rejected by his own family. And it had to be heartbreaking in my opinion.
Half brothers and half sisters, I feel like that wouldn't be as common in that day and age.
Yeah, it wouldn't be.
Well, think about it though. Lots of them had multiple wives. So I don't know that having half brothers and half sisters was.
Well, that's true.
It had gotten less popular. They
In
had
Jesus'
really, in Jesus' time, it was not like it was back in Moses' time.
Yeah.
But I don't think that was unheard of.
Yeah.
And death was so rapid too, I think, that people would remarry. So I don't think that would be that rare.
Yeah.
But I just imagine like growing up with Jesus and Mary's like, why can't you be like your brother, Jesus? You have to grow up with the perfect brother, and they're always hearing, why can't you be like your brother?
That'll be really hurtful.
Yeah.
Mom, I can't do that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Next question.
The next question, I think Dave just covered it already, is how does having a supportive family affect our lives and what we do? And
Yeah, go ahead.
no, it's basically he didn't have their support, and how hard it is to be rejected by the people outside, but to even be rejected inside is really hard. So he didn't have family support. The difference when you've been supported by somebody in an endeavor, but if you're not supported within your family, how difficult that would be. So we just know that he just had opposition from every side.
Yeah, and it's important there, and I think I was going with that question too, is Jesus not having the support of his family was tough. Now I think Mary, no question, she knew that she asked him to change the water to wine, and when brings his loneliness and after new thing. We talked about the timing, that's his first miracle. So I think Mary believed him. So I think she supported him. But what goes beyond that is what reminded me of this is the support of family in your mission, whatever it is. Jesus didn't have it right that much except for Mary, but many people, whether it's jobs or whether they have calling or something, they don't get the family support. and it makes it more difficult. And when it comes to, I'm not being silly, but when it comes to diet, and it comes to exercise. When you have spouses that don't agree, it makes it very difficult for one of them to try to follow something they want to and the other one's not. And it really is, in most families where we've seen where one spouse wants to eat really healthy and the other one doesn't, it just, it never works, it doesn't. It's constant falling back, getting off the wagon for the one trying to eventually, they're completely off. So I've seen that over and over, and I went through that in my personal life with one of my wives, where she would eat healthy for a while and she couldn't take it, and just everything got changed, and I'd fall off with her. And right back into the same old junk before. And I saw that over and over. So it's very difficult if you don't have a supporting spouse or family member or whatever it is, trying to be in sync with what your goals are, whether it be physical or spiritual, or whether it be whatever it is. It's very difficult without that support. So, all right, next set of scripture. You want to change it? Then Jesus said to them, my time is not yet come, but your time is always ready. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify of it that its works are evil. You go up to the feast. I am not yet going up to the feast, for my time is not yet fully come. When he said these things to them, he remained in Galilee. So a couple of things here, depends on what version of the Bible you have. The yet may not be there. My time has not come. I'm not going to Jerusalem yet has been left out. So if the yet is left out, when you go back to the Greek, the word that's being used here is got a yet. It means I'm not going yet. So when it says I'm not going, the Greek word used is I'm not going yet. So the correct version is putting the yet in here. Yet there's some translations that don't put it. That's first. So why did Jesus not travel to the feast with his brothers?
Like you said earlier about just knowing the Father's will and times for that. So, he's not gonna do anything that's outside the Father's will.
And I think that's the most valid question. It's not his time. And I think there's some sidelines, things that go with that. If he goes up, and we'll find out as we read further, he went up alone. He didn't have his apostles, disciples, anybody else. So it wasn't only he was not going with his brothers, he wasn't going with the whole crowd that was going to Jerusalem. They were all going to the mandated feast, right? And so everybody's going, he stayed in Galilee while everybody left. And we get an indication, everybody, all of his apostles left, everybody that was following him left, he was left alone. And the valid first reason is it wasn't yet his time, but he did go to the festival. So whether he traveled 2 weeks early or 2 weeks later, I struggle with that's not his time yet. So his time was to be in Jerusalem. So what would be the other reason? And I think the Jewish leaders were pursuing him more and more and more. They were looking to kill him. And they knew he would be coming in. They knew his ministry up was in Galilee. He'd be coming in with group, and they'd be looking for him. They say, here comes the group in. They would be looking to arrest him. And he just avoided that by coming in almost secretly alone. But he didn't stay there. So it wasn't out of fear. Because he starts boldly, we'll see that. He starts boldly preaching, when he gets there. So it's not like he's trying to be hidden after he's there. When he gets there, he starts. So I really think he didn't go so that he could come in at his own timing and come in without the Jewish leader seeing him. And then he got in, and then he was preaching in synagogues. So it wasn't like he was hiding from them once he got there. But they were looking for him before he got there. So that, I think, That, and I do think the timing thing is very much valid as well, but I think there was kind of more than that, because if it's not yet God's timing, I know minutes count, seconds count. Does 2 weeks count? Yes, it does, but it was God's timing for him to be there. But not there 2 weeks earlier with the rest of the crowd. All right,
So the next question is, this is a strange statement. So Jesus says, my time is not yet come, but your time is always ready. What does that mean?
I think it goes back to this first one where it says, the Father, God's important time. So Jesus goes on God's time, and because probably their following is not following God's time, it's their own time. So they have time for whatever. But Jesus has only time what God is actually telling him to do, so waiting for his time.
Okay.
I also feel like they're, as disciples and as apostles, they're not hated yet, which he kind of points out. They cannot hate you because like Jesus is there and his message is so much more like aggressive. And so they're not at the level yet where they're bringing an aggressive message because they're still followers.
Okay, so he's talking to his physical half brothers here.
Okay.
Okay, and so I'll go back to the question that Elliot answered about your time is always ready, and that was exactly right. So Jesus was focused only on doing things according to God's timing, but his brothers were following the world. So just as you said, well, you don't have a timing. You're not following anything. You can go as you want to go. And so that's what that meant. And then if we go to the next question, why can't the world hate Jesus' brothers? And so thinking about it that way, not talking about disciples, but brothers, why do you think the world, because he said the world hates me because I testify that what they're doing is wrong. You go up to the feast, I'm not gonna go, for my time is not yet fully come. He said, the world can't hate you, but it hates me. So why can't the world hate brothers?
I'm sorry now.
Because they are worldly, because they're still in the evil.
Right.
They're
They can't hate what they're
accepted.
right.
right.
That's exactly right.
Darkness can't hate darkness. Darkness only hates the light,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So the best way, the world can't hate itself. And be dark, and you see, so that's exactly right. They were still too worldly. And worldly, I want what I wanted, right? There is no timing in that, right? So that's the worldly aspect that Jesus is bringing up to us that he wrote 2,000 years ago. Think about it. And that's our culture today. I don't want to wait. I want it now.
Immediate.
Yeah, there's no timing involved in this. So no, let's not wait till we save enough. Oh no, let's just go in debt. I want it now.
Yeah.
Hey, that's not just today. That's been that way for a long time. It's in my culture. Man, I was financed up to here to get the stuff I wanted. Because as long as it met, as long as I can write that monthly check, didn't matter anything else, as long as I could write that monthly check. That all switched things over time, but it took a while. A little hard here. So it's really interesting that it was written so long ago, but it's so valid and applicable to us today. So we said we would keep it just a short study. We get into 10 to 15 next week, I think. I don't know that we're gonna go much past 10 to 15 next week because that's it's the sending out of the apostles. No, what is it? Next week, no. What's the 10 through 15? That's Matthew.
Right,
Huh?
right.
That's Matthew. We're doing these two studies simultaneously. It's tough to track which one's doing what. It's actually.
So his brothers leave
Yeah, and then he goes secretly,
and then he goes there
and then he starts getting into really the
and the
back and
crowd
forth.
starts saying he's got demons. and-
Right. So I don't know how far we get next week, but
Now, what is our role in God's timing? What is our role in God's timing?
Yeah,
That's the last question.
right.
yeah, it's done on that.
I don't have it on my sheet. So what is our role? What is our role in God's timing? What do you think?
Trust the sovereign God. creator. As far as our role goes. Just be obedient, because I mean, he knows everything, his thoughts are higher than ours, so. Just be obedient to God's timing the best you can, walking with the Spirit.
Yeah, I think that's a tough question to answer, just outright, but. The reality of it is, you said the right word, and again, this is my opinion, is our role is to trust. God is sovereign, God's timing is right, we don't understand. If we ask God for something, we will get an answer. But we don't know the timing of that answer, right? We may get a no. We may get a yes. We may not, we may get a maybe. But we don't always get the answer to what it is that we're asking for, the way we're asking for it. And the timing doesn't always come the way we think we ought to have it, the timing. But we trust. But even if it's not our time in our role, well, we trust that God knows what he's doing. And it will be to our benefit when it does come, whatever it is that comes, yes, no, whatever. So that's the tough part. Our role is to understand it's not our desire, it's when God chooses to do it. And his decisions are sovereign. That means we have nothing to do with when and how he really answers our prayers, our questions. But it's pretty obvious that we don't even ask for things. And faithfulness in God, even if we didn't ask God for it, he seems to make things happen that we wouldn't even imagine out of things that we thought didn't go the way we thought it would.